to attend the last Rex meeting?
I watched it after it was recorded, yes.
All right, very good. Then you don't have to hear this one. Basically, it's a regurgitation of the last Rex meeting dealing with disclosures.
Gotcha.
What's going on? What is this? Oh, here we go. Well, I'm the only one participating right now. Hopefully, I'm in the right meeting. That's all I can say is hopefully that I'm in the right meeting. I'm not always in the right meeting. I wonder if there's a different Zoom meeting that I need to know about. There's a different link. There's Sylvia. We got one person.
Yay!
Yeah. How's business been?
It's getting a little better again. It was a little slow there in September, end of August and September, but now I feel it's getting better again. Interestingly.
Well, excellent.
So.
Do. Pulling up some documents. What else? How many? Oh, there you go. Just gotta disable my notifications here for a second, so my computer doesn't go. What are you brewing on? You got anything special that you're working on, Sylvia?
Yeah, I've got a kind of an interesting situation where I'm actually going to be neutral and I'm going to facilitate a transaction just between the buyer and the seller. It's really cool. The seller is an older guy, owns a few properties, and he just wants to have this young couple to have his house. And it's going to go way below market value, but he just says people don't do anything nice anymore, and I just want to do something nice. So.
Oh, good.
Kind of interesting. It's kind of inspiring to see people still do good deeds.
Well, there's more of them than you realize. They don't get much press.
Yes, and he said too. He goes, "I don't want anybody to know about this. I just want this to be done." And kind of go, "Wow, you're a nice guy."
Excellent. Well, I was going to talk to you today about residential property transfer disclosure statements and some of the other disclosures that need to go into
Sure.
and reviewing some of those forms, you know, when we take listings. We'll see if anybody's going to join us here in a minute. 11:03. Seems like this has been the time of year where everybody's just pretty much just checked out. But look at you, voraciously looking to expand your knowledge.
Yeah.
Greatly appreciated.
Well,
So one thing I wanted to go over was on the residential property transfer disclosure statement and some of the laws that apply to it. I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen real quick. When you've probably seen this, you got any listings coming up?
potentially, yes. Yeah, I'm trying to.
All right, that's
And
excellent.
I have this form. I've got a blank form in front of me.
Oh, really?
Yep, I do.
That is very useful to have. So one thing is to understand that when you have a residential real property transfer disclosure statement, what kind of properties it applies to. And the thing is that it actually only applies for residential and duplexes, okay? Where a seller has lived in it, okay? It actually is not intended to go for triplexes and over because they're figuring at that point the seller has lived in less than 50% of the property. I imagine that's kind of the thought process behind it. But it is not technically required, for triplex, fourplexes and over. But can you think of a case where you might still want to get one?
Well, I think as a seller, because I mean, I always recommend my sellers to do it. It is for their protection. So I think if a seller would like to have one, I would always recommend it if possible.
Well, although in your, have your seller provide one. Although the residential real property transfer disclosure statement is only required for owner-occupied properties, duplex and single family, and not required for anything larger. And that's very important because it says right here, it means any single family dwelling,
Yep.
any two single family dwelling units under one roof, okay? So can you think of a case where you might have two dwellings that aren't under one roof? Yeah, what if you have two houses on one lot? This isn't used for that, okay? Or an individual unit in a multi-structure common interest for the purposes. So that would be a condo. But essentially, it's only strictly used for those. That is the requirement. All other properties, even if they're owner occupied, they can disclose the waiver. You know, they can waive it. And this form technically is not even required. Now, oftentimes, even if they're not doing this form, we have a waiver by agreement. Although, if you read it, it says it's only intended to cover these. Just depends on logic or depends on your thought on, do I need to waive a form that's not required in a sale? Well, it's a very good question. We try to err on the side of caution and get a waiver, even though understanding that a waiver for a residential property transfer disclosure statement on a fourplex is redundant since this form is not, since they're not required. Under the own state law, they're not required. But that said, is there times when you might want one of these on a triplex or fourplex? I would say yes, if they live in it, just simply because, there are some really good questions in here. And we would just say, hey, the seller is to answer the questions to the best of their ability. And that is the state law. This law does say the seller is required to fill this out in good faith. So what does that mean when they say a seller must fill this out in good faith?
To the best of their knowledge and not hiding any, known defects.
Yeah, they also have to make reasonable effort to discover some of the other items. They have to make a reasonable effort, meaning that they ask them a question and that information is easily available. Good faith means that put some effort into finding out. I mean, can you think of a situation where you as a listing agent have some good faith responsibility to disclose, and this has come up. This is where you might have some liability.
Yes, actually, yes. And I'm actually in the middle of a transaction right now, and I'm glad you're bringing this up, where it is a duplex and the property owner has lived out of state for years. And I mean, we're talking about Australia, and I believe currently she lives in Texas, and she has filled out a property waiver or a disclosure waiver by agreement and said the property is being sold in as is condition.
Yes.
However, during the inspection process, the tenant below said, we have been complaining to the property management companies for 6 or 7 years about moisture problems and mold, which I believe now is probably only mildew. But the property management company has known about it and apparently have contacted her about it.
She's
She has
required, she's
anything
required
about
to
it.
disclose that.
That's, yeah. So, I mean, it's all he said, she said, nothing is in writing,
Well,
but it seems to me like she is not disclosing.
Well, even if there's a waiver, you know, you would make sure
Right.
your contract states that the seller shall disclose, even if it's as is, all material information regarding the physical condition of the property, all
Right.
notices of tenants of any deferred maintenance items,
Yeah.
and communications from property manager dealing with maintenance and management concerns.
Do you put that in on the 26th?
Why not? Why not throw it in it's not a repair amendment, it's just asking for the disclosures. Put them on record as far as knowing that those items need to be provided. And it's okay to sell something as is, but the buyer has as Bill Clinton would say, you have a right to know what is.
Yeah.
Ha ha ha. Hey,
Okay.
Kevin, so
Yes.
I've got one I'm actually doing today. It's an estate sale. So I'm having the personal representative pre-sign the waiver, but I am also taking that amendment page on the property disclosure, and I'm going to have her, because her mother died in the unit, so she has to disclose that. And also they've put in flooring, et cetera, et cetera.
I would
So
encourage
she
them. I would encourage them to fill one out, and and as part of the page under the additional terms or under that additional disclosures page, I think it's 7 or 8 of the residential property. They may just put in there, seller inherited property through an estate. You know, I'd make a note in there, has limited knowledge and has filled this out to the best of their ability, based on their limited ownership.
Okay.
Okay, so just make sure they just disclose. Here's the best thing, just explain it. I inherited this property. I have filled this out to the best of my ability because we have done some repairs, but many of these items are beyond our scope of knowledge. And we encourage the buyer to perform thorough due diligence to their satisfaction.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you know, so, all right, so on this, so we're in another situation. Yeah, let's say somebody rehab or flips a property. You can't tell me that they don't know anything about it. So they might want to just have them fill it out. It is not required, but if you have a buyer who's buying a property and you represent them, you might say, hey, seller, you can't tell me you don't know anything about this property. Heck, you guys just remodeled it. You just put a bunch of work on it. Please fill one out. And you may request it. Again, triplex, fourplex over, it is not required. However, you know, you may request one. Okay. Now, so it can be waived right here under waiver by agreement. But look at this, signing this waiver does not affect other obligations for disclosure, okay? So if they sign the waiver, what is an obligation of disclosure? If they have material information regarding the physical condition of the property, they have any written reports or anything, they are required to provide them. That is an obligation of disclosure. They can't say, well, you said you'd buy it and I waived it. And it's like, but you sat on a bunch of engineering reports saying that there was issues. What were you thinking? Right? So just because they waive something by agreement does not mean that they can get out of it, which sounds like the case in yours, Sylvia, which is, you know, you've got a situation, but understand, hey, listen, you waived it does not mean that you don't have to provide any material information regarding the physical condition of the property, which would fall under written notices from the landlord and tenant regarding maintenance issues with the property. And so I don't know who the licensee is on the other side, but you might send them another email and just say, hey, I want to make sure you're aware of this. Then we're requesting information from the property manager or anything regarding these items.
What if some of these I have not found out or discovered until after the due diligence period?
Well, then I would ask, I would sign an amendment
Okay.
because this is, so how did you find out about these items?
Well, the tenants,
Okay, very good.
tenants
So
complained.
this is a
yes.
new disclosure. And I would say, and I would write an amendment immediately. Like, how long ago did you find out?
Just like the day after the due diligence and the
All right,
negotiation.
so I would ask for an
period and
extension of the due diligence and go, on so-and-so date, a conversation with the tenant revealed these facts or contingencies of potential maintenance issues and mold issues. Buyer requests all material information regarding physical condition of the property, regarding maintenance claims and suggestions by said tenant to property manager. Any communications regarding property maintenance from property manager to seller to be provided to buyer. And I'd write an amendment and send that over right away. This is a new disclosure, basically. Now you're beyond your due diligence,
Yes.
which means, but it doesn't mean if something new rears its head and it's a new factor finding that you're not within your right to either ask for remedies. Remember, they're supposed to maintain the property in equal or better condition than when you looked at it. And what you've now reveals is a factor contingency that they know about that they haven't revealed to you. This isn't like it's something new and a surprise to everybody. And it's like, oh, this is something we suspect that they knew about and have not disclosed.
Okay, I have called the listing licensee and we have asked telephonically whether they would be okay with an extended due diligence period, and they said no. So
All right,
we're
well then
kinda going
send over a
into-
termination and just go, you either extend my term, you either extend
Okay.
our due diligence and get me this, or I will terminate.
Okay,
Because then your buyer has to ask themselves, what's more at risk? Are they more concerned about losing out on some money from a home inspection or buying a property that has potential mold and water issues?
okay,
I mean, don't be afraid to say, okay, well, if you're not going to extend it, we're going to terminate. Because we have new information regarding we have information and conversations from the tenant regarding these issues. Based on that, it's a new disclosure. Your tenant has basically said that there's moisture and a bunch of issues in this property. And you know what? No, we won't proceed.
okay. All right, good to know.
Unless you provide us the communications and documentations from the property. Have you spoke to the property manager?
No, how much will they be able to tell me? Are they authorized to tell me?
I don't know, but I would call them and just say, I have a buyer who's under contract to buy this property, and I'm asking you about material information regarding the physical condition. If you are this, and if my buyer buys it, and I find out that you or the seller did not provide the information that was required in order, and withheld this information, will make you a party to any kind of, I hate to say that, I'd make you a party to any
Right.
kind of legal action.
Okay, all right.
So what do
We'll
you
do
know?
that.
Because the tenant is saying that you know,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So, and who's the
Cool.
other licensee's manager? A broker.
It's Bob Bolding is the listing licensee 1, and David, his
All right.
last name is licensee 2.
It's Bob Bolding, and I have a conversation. Bob, you don't, if there's a concern or there's something and it's not being disclosed and they're not providing evidence of this, this is not a small deal. Like,
Yeah.
disclose it.
Okay,
So just disclose it. That way the buyer, at least, who's to say the buyer doesn't continue buying the property and go, oh, this is a minor issue. Okay, well, whatever. At least I know about it.
yeah,
But it is
And
not their decision to make whether or not the buyer would still buy the property if they knew
Okay.
about it. It is
Right.
only their job to provide the knowledge. Okay, so you look at this again, failure to comply. A person who negligently violates or fails to perform a duty required by this is liable to the buyer for actual damages suffered by the buyer as a result of violation or failure. Okay, so we have someone who negligently performs one, and that is they don't fill this out, and they didn't fill it out in good faith. If the person willfully violates or fails to perform a duty, the seller is liable to the buyer for up to 3 times the actual damages. In addition to the damages, the court may also award the buyer costs or attorney fees to allow us in on the court. Okay. Finally, then they start filling this out. Remember, they have to make reasonable effort in good faith. Okay, do they know it? And you can just look through these. Property built, right? When was the property built? We can look that up on tax records. Construction overview. Maybe they're not sure. I understand. They're not required to get a home inspection to figure these things out, but there's some things you can do. You can look at previous listing. By the way, If they bought the house 3 or 4 years ago and there is a previous residential property transfer disclosure statement, I would encourage you to go ahead and print that one out, and whatever information is there, make sure it gets transferred over. Because when they bought the property, they were aware that there was a disclosure. They may not have experienced it during their ownership, but it was disclosed to them when they bought it. Therefore, it is a material information regarding the physical condition of the property. A previous residential property disclosure is material information. When you take a listing, you have the responsibility as a listing licensee to go back and look at previous sales and find other reports that are online, okay? So this is really important. This is really important. Is it reasonable that you as a licensee can go back and look at when the house was sold 4 or 5, 6 years ago? Yeah, who doesn't do that? Can you name one realtor who lists a property without looking at the history of the property? I can't think of any. Now, is it also reasonable to think that we could just right click on Documents tab and see what information is there? Yes. If you as a listing licensee don't do that, and there is information in there that is detrimental to the condition of the property, okay, you could be liable. You put yourself at risk. If you are a buyer's representative and there's information and you don't bother to research it and you don't provide that information to your buyer, both licensees can be at risk. Because what is the job of a real estate professional? And it's not to sell real estate. What is the job of a real estate professional?
To protect the public and to
There you
protect
go.
my client.
Protect the public, and the public being both the buyer and the seller. Make sure they don't do something intentional or unintentionally that could jeopardize both parties, and that is do research. So when you're filling this out, do a research and see if there is a previous one that was done, and it wouldn't be bad to upload in the documents and go, here's a residential property transfer disclosure statement when they bought it 4 years ago. Then you've got, hey, here's the one where they bought it. And then here's the new one since they've owned it, and look for any kind of differences and changes or whatever it is. Then you've covered your butt magnificently, okay? But if you can go back and look at a previous listing and you see that there's errors or differences between that listing and the current one that's listed, it should be red flags. Like, hey, why is this different? Or in like Paula and I had a conversation this morning. Hey, listen, one says that it used to be on a well, and now it says it's public water and sewer. How can that be? Did they connect public water and sewer? And is that in a disclosure? Like, what happened? And it's very reasonable to go back and look. And that is the responsibility that I saw. And sorry, while I'm sitting here talking, oh, you guys can't see it. It was share screen. I'm sitting here flicking through the disclosure. So I thought maybe I was making you guys dizzy, but you're looking at my face, so it doesn't apply. All right, let me go back here. Okay, so we go back. You're going to fill this out. You're going to start with your property management. You're going to start year built, construction overview. Now look, this is another important one. Name the filters that are built in, and also circle those items that are known to have defects or malfunctions. Circle those items that have defects or malfunctions. Look what's in here. Cooktop, ovens, blinds, microwaves, dishwasher, garbage disposal, hot water. If they fill this out, okay, and you find out later that it didn't work, guys, you're supposed, and they've known it didn't work, well, they were supposed to circle those items that have defects or malfunctions. I don't think enough people read this to their sellers to say, hey, did you do this? And if there is a defect or malfunction, that's what this page is for, right? This page at the very end. And by the way, you may use 5 or 6 of these. That's why they're blank down here. You would page 5 or 6, but you could. That's why there's no page number down here, page 101, so that you can use these multiple times. You're not limited to that one page. You can print that page out multiple times and fill it in as much as you need. However, if any of the built-ins, a hot tub is out back, doesn't work, better circle it and say bad pump, whatever it is, hasn't worked. Water filtration, greenhouse storage. Have them read through these, check the items that stay, circle the items that have defects. Okay, explain that to your seller. Additionally, same thing applies down here. Check only those items that have known defects, malfunctions, or had major repairs performed within the last 5 years. So anything that's had alterations, they're going to check them and then also describe the defect, malfunction, or repair. So don't just check it. What is it? So if somebody says garage, right? And then you should be able to go and say, what did they do to the garage? Did they fix sheetrock? Did they fix it here? They should be able to go to that page 8, and they would say section 2. They would say, they would reference page 2. So you go back down to this, go back to this page. It says page 2, garage. And then you write explanation. Replaced garage door motor, summer of 2018, right? So you would check it and then provide a notice, okay? Water filtering. So you read through all these things, guys. Just do your. This is part of where it just comes to do your job when you fill this out, and make sure your sellers understand that they are required to fill this out in good faith. Because if they don't, they are liable for not just actual damages, but up to 3 times the damages. It can be way, way more expensive to fix it on the backside, plus pay for whatever fees, and is just to disclose it. And if it's disclosed to the buyer and the buyer doesn't, reads it, signs it, and moves on, and they come back and say, well, the garage door motor doesn't work and blah, blah, blah. You go, well, one, I disclosed to you that I replaced it. It worked fine when I did it. And then, and you had a home inspection. So did you get a home warranty? Too bad for you. But at least you disclosed any work that was done on the property. All right, sorry, I'm scrolling again. All right, check judgments. Are you have any of these reports? Engineer report, title information, as-built survey, okay? So this information couples with, if you get a property profile, you would fill out your property profile, and you might then click some of these items. You know, I got title information. I found an old as-built. Okay, maybe a copy of the PER 102, which is certification, means it was newer construction, built, you know, after like 1998, right? Are there water rights? A certificate? Well, you know, you might have, is there a shared well? What kind of information is in there? And just, is it a 0 lot line? You should have a party wall agreement. That would be part of the title information, but check the documents that you would have in there. Normally what you should be doing is getting a copy of a property profile from the title company, providing that to your seller for them to verify it's accurate. And then they would have some of this information in order to fill. You can also click other. What are other things that a seller might have that are useful that you might disclose? How about an old resale certificate with the rules and regulations? Well, there is a resale, so you got a resale right here. You have an old one. What other kind of things might you have? Well,
yeah, on that resale, if you have a property seller in an HOA, do you ever get that resale certificate right when you list it, or do you always wait until it's under contract?
No, it's typically after it's under contract, because it has to be within the last 90 days, because you have, it's got to have the most recent minutes and a statement for the insurance binder. And so you got to make sure that the information is useful. So it's got to be, I think it's 90 to 120 days. And then after that, it expires, it requires an update. Because you may have, you know, another meeting may come along and they may say, oh, by the way, we're getting ready to special assess everybody $500.
Right.
Right. Well, that's useful information. So it's only as good as the last meeting. Other information might be, maybe they have a written agreement between them and the neighbor. Okay. Maybe there's, because these are documents for the subject property that the seller has available for review. Now it's a multifamily, maybe it's click leases, right? Maybe they got leases. Maybe they have an agreement between them and the seller of the other property, the owner of the property next door, for shared driveway or shared parking, or maybe they share a dumpster and they're both paying for it. Like, is there a written agreement? So here is not only where you put your documents regarding the physical condition, but any other contracts or anything that would be subject to. Remember that this is one of the first forms a buyer looks at. So you want to put all this together. Package this thing up real nice and tidy into a beautiful disclosure package for this buyer. Okay, get it all out of the way. It should also include attached to it the lead-based paint addendum, right? And then it should be online so the buyer and their licensee can look at all this before they write the offer. The intention is that you provide them as much information before they write the offer, so you bulletproof your transaction on the backside that they can't say, this is new, okay? In the last 5 years, has the property been inspected by an engineer, home inspector? Okay, so yes or no. If they bought it, okay, and they've owned it less than 5 years, did you get a home inspection? Where is that home inspection? You are required to disclose it. Okay, if you don't and they can't find it, go back and find out who the licensee was when they bought it or who was involved in the sale, and you know, and have them provide that to you. Roof or other leakage, again, goes in the roof, fireplace, heating systems. Again, they have to make reasonable effort. Okay, they can't, if they don't put anything in here, guys, if they don't put anything, and we actually had this happen. This was on one. We had somebody getting ready to record on a sale, and the inspection failed because the heating system was too old. And the other realtor said, and they said, well, you know, we just had the heating system inspected. The guy says it's at the end of it. It works, but it's at the end of its life expectancy because it's like 80 year. It's like, well, it wasn't 80. It was like a 40-year-old heating system. And the argument from the other brokerage is, well, we disclosed that to you in the residential property transfer disclosure statement. You knew it was 40 years old when you wrote your offer. And I went back and looked, and they didn't put a date or anything. They didn't fill out. They go, oh, no, they didn't, because you didn't fill it in on your disclosure. You can't say the buyer knew it was an old system when they went to buy it, even though it's working, when you left all this blank, right? Now, it's reasonable to say if they had put that it's hot or other, it hasn't been serviced in 27 years, and it's, you know, or it's serviced regularly, but it's 37 years old, and a buyer acknowledges this, and then they get an inspection and they says it works, it's just old, and you want a new one. It's like, no, you knew it was 37 years old when you brought your offer. You signed and acknowledged it. It works. This is not a new disclosure. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The system fully functioned and is working, and it was acknowledged and disclosed that it was old when they filled out the buyer. This is not a new disclosure. This is not something they can just simply terminate and get their earnest money back. I have a clean inspection. The system works. You knew when you wrote your offer how old it was. You can't now try to renegotiate something that you knew that was a material fact when you brought it. However, if you leave these blank, not so much. Same with hot water heater. We got our water supply, and then just have you failed? Has the pump failed? Have you had any issues? So we go through this, and it's just really important. Now down here, okay, other things that get often overlooked. Average utility cost. To the best of your knowledge, are you aware of the following conditions respecting subject property? So these are the best of your knowledge, but annual utility costs. I find it really strange that a lot of people leave these blank. I think I think that they should fill them out. I think you should call their utility companies and then say who is the company, who is the source. You know, that also makes it a lot easier when you go to do your final and time to transfer utilities. You just go to your residential property transfer disclosure statement and say, here's all utility costs, and here they are, and here's who you need to call, right? Rather than trying to hunt down who the utility companies are. As far as the sewer system, a lot of them don't know this, or they just put no. But obviously, if they have if they had a COSA when they bought it 5, 6, 7 years ago, you can find that report online, and you should say, hey, you left this blank. However, you had a COSA when it was filled. Mr. Seller, you do need to fill this out. You know, a lot of times you just want to get the property on the market right away, but I would rather that they fill this out properly and wait an extra couple days than throw a property on the market with an inaccurately filled out residential property transfer disclosure statement, because that would be more detrimental. That's just asking for a contract to default. Okay, title issues. Okay, here's a homeowners association. Is there a homeowners association? Names, what are the dues? Okay, we all know those. And who is responsible for issuing the certificate? Okay, they should be able to get that information and who they have and put that in here. That helps you a lot on making sure that your timelines as far as ordering the resale. Okay, so we just read through this and we can just see, you're going to notice that everything is asked like a Robert Rules of Order. Have you guys ever participated or served on a board where they follow the Robert Rules of Order?
No, I have not, but yeah, I understand the thought behind it.
Have you ever wondered why some of the laws that you're passing are worded so weird?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything has to be done in the affirmative. So
Yes.
even if I wanted, let's say this is what's really interesting about like a plating board. Let's say that I have somebody, let's say that according to Robert Rules of Order and contract law, everything is placed in the positive. So let's say that there was a conflict of interest, that we were voting on what we're having for lunch, right? And one of the people who's providing lunch to our group happens to be my wife's restaurant. And so I would have to recuse myself because I'd be voting to basically benefit a conflict of interest. I'm just using a real basic stuff. So what would happen is a motion would come before the board is, hey, we move that Kevin participate in the vote for what we're having for lunch. We wouldn't say, hey, we're going to vote for Kevin doesn't because he has a conflict of interest. All those in voting for Kevin not participate. You don't do that. What you do is you say, hey, our motion is that Kevin participates, and yes, who's first and second. And then it's okay. And then they say, okay, well, I'm not voting for this because Kevin has a conflict of interest. So it would all be nays against it.
Yeah.
This is the same thing. They're written in an affirmative. Like, is this happen? Did this happen? And with yes or no. So when you're looking at it, your eyes just go right to the yes column because the yes column means yes, there's an issue. So it has that same thing. Are you aware of? Are there deeds? So that's the way a lot of these things are written. So let's see what we've got here. I'm gonna go back to the screen share. Okay. Encroachments, does anything on your property encroach extent into your neighbor's property? And, just read through this and make sure that they're aware of this. Soil stability, construction, remodel, improvements. Hey, if they've done it, describe the work. Were permits, was the work performed with necessary permits? No. No, I pulled no permits to do the work. Okay, at least you disclosed it. Was a final inspection? No. Has a fire ever occurred in the structure, whatever it is, pest control. All right. So then buyer's notice and receipt of copy. After they do all this, the transfer buyer is independently responsible for determining whether a person, so they have to look for sexual offenders, and this information is available, and then they go into, so again, this is the second time you see a sexual offender, okay? And also whether or not it's near an agricultural facility or whether or not you've got like meth labs and all that stuff. So they're just saying it's your responsibility to look at all these other things. Why do you think they don't require the seller to provide information regarding sexual offenders or whether or not it's close to an agricultural facility or whether or not it produces too much odor, dust flumes or whatever, or smoke? But I think the seller is not required to do that.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, you don't really want to. I mean, it's a little bit of a personal opinion too.
That's exactly right. It's a personal opinion. Hey, I might think that your perfume is too strong. Other people may not. It's a personal opinion. Those are not things that affect. I mean, that is something that is subject to the buyer's opinion. So listen, someone may not worry about living next to an agricultural operation. You guys ever been down to driven past a Boise Cascade plant, like outside of Kennewick, Pascal in Washington on your way to Walla Walla?
Yeah.
Okay, there's this valley, which is the Valley of Death. And on one side is a Boise Cascade paper mill. And if you've ever driven by a paper mill where they're just taking all that wood and that mulch, and it smells like sewer. It smells like the worst sewer you've ever smelt as they're making cardboard. Well, in this valley, as you drive through, there's Boise Cascade on one side. And guess what's on the other side of the road as you go through the valley?
Oh, shoot, I don't know.
Yeah, it's the Kroger meat plant, the butcher facility for all of Washington. So whether the wind is blowing east or west, you're either going to get the smell of rotting animal carcasses and lakes of blood, or you're going to get that meal, or you're going to get that or that paper mill. It's one way or the other. It's the worst thing. We always called it the Valley of Death when I used to go down to Walla Walla and party with buddies in my college days. But And when we drove through that valley, we'd like, okay, we're coming out. We'd crank the AC and get it nice and cool in the cab. We'd roll up all the windows, turn the heat off, and then haul ass through that valley for about 15 miles till you got up out the other side. But again, that's one of those things where, hey, maybe someone's not bothered by that. Maybe, maybe they have cauterized nose or nasal ducts due to something. And so, it doesn't affect them and they're perfectly fine with the property. So all these things are basically subject to a buyer's interpretation of whether or not it's offensive. And therefore it is their job to research those. Okay. The buyer is urged to inspect the property carefully and to have the property inspected by an expert. Buyer understands there are aspects of property which the seller may not have knowledge and that this disclosure statement does not encompass those aspects. Buyer also acknowledges that he or she has read and received a copy of the statement from the seller or any licensee involved in participating in this transaction. Okay, so here's another thing. Buyer understands. Okay, this is basically saying, we've done the best we can, but you still have some responsibility to do some research. Okay. So then finally, ASC, this provides that a disclosure statement or material amendment is delivered to the buyer after the buyer has made a written offer. The buyer may terminate the offer delivered in writing of a notice to the seller, the seller's licensing within 3 days of the disclosure statement, or amendment is delivered in person, or within 6 days after the disclosure statement amendment is delivered or deposited by mail. Okay, which we rarely use mail anymore. But the point is that it doesn't matter if the due diligence is over. It doesn't matter what it is. That's why it's so important to have these things up front. The minute it touches the buyer's hands, and by the way, to the seller or the seller's licensee within 3 days. What's important about that statement?
Well, it's the licensee too.
Yeah. Well, the buyer has made a written offer. The buyer may terminate the offer by delivering a written notice of termination to the seller or to the seller's licensee within 3 days after disclosure. Oftentimes what you will see is you will see someone say, well, the buyer didn't get it till X.
Yes.
Okay. It is from when you sent it to the licensee, but you must be able to prove that you sent something to the licensee. So if you are sending a termination notice and time is of the essence and we're right at the end of it and it's like, hey, listen, I got less than 12 hours according to the contract that we either terminate or we're stuck in here or whatever it is. You draft your notice. You should always email those over with a read receipt.
Yeah.
Always email them over with a read receipt so you know when that licensee opened it. Because according to state law, it is to the seller or their buyer or to their licensee. So whenever you have something that's time sensitive, what other disclosed documents, as we move on from this one, what other disclosed documents are time sensitive to a contract that when you deliver them, you should be putting read receipts on your emails? Preliminary title. That's right. You have 3 to 5 days to overlook title. What else?
Resale.
Resale's a huge one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Resale's big. How often have you sent over the resale certificate, but they didn't get you an acknowledgement from the buyer for a week?
Often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's not how that goes. You have an acknowledgement and you say you received it and you will convey this to your client. It starts now. You are their representative and you have a read receipt. Okay. And so it's great that they finally signed it, but if it took them 4 days for you to get it to them, they should have hired a more efficient licensee. Right?
Yeah.
What was the question?
I have a question about resale certificates in general.
Yes.
What triggers the need or the requirement for a resale? If there's a homeowners association that does not collect dues and
Okay.
they don't issue resales,
Okay. So if they're inactive, then you don't get a
No.
resale.
they're active.
Okay. So, well then, I guess you would need some sort of statement of fact whether or not they have one. If you don't have, if they're not, just because they're not collecting dues, doesn't mean they don't have some sort of authority over the property. And you need to
Right,
make sure
so-
that that everything regarding their authority over the property has been disclosed.
So we just went through this where the sellers left it blank on the property disclosure.
Okay.
And then it was revealed later that there was a HOA, an HOA run by volunteers. And the only way I found out is I went into the corporation's website
Yeah.
and found their incorporated documents. It had the email addresses of the officers. So I emailed all of them and I said, what is the deal here? And I learned that they didn't collect dues, but they were going to collect a transfer fee from the seller. So I had the sellers do an updated property disclosure, that
Yep.
last amendment page, but it was very weird.
Well, then you just disclose that. Either you do that in an amendment and say, buyer acknowledges that Silver Creek HOA is a voluntary HOA that is not currently collecting dues. Buyer has until X date to fulfill their, to complete their due diligence regarding the status of the HOA, and upon recording shall be deemed that they're, or by X date, shall be deemed that they're satisfied with their findings. I mean, I basically would just write an amendment and just say, let's just address this. Just address it in writing. Let's make sure everybody's on the same board.
Okay.
Okay, buyer and seller acknowledge that there is a voluntary HOA that does not collect annual dues, but does collect a transfer fee of X. This fee of X shall be paid by seller at closing. Buyer has until X date to research regulations of the HOA. Buyer's decision to purchase the property based on those findings shall be completed by X date. You just want to have, remember the TAP TC, what is the time, what is the action, who is the decision maker, what is, and then what are the consequences if they don't perform. Just something, I would just address that. And just,
Yeah.
are we in
So,
agreement?
is it the collection of dues, do you think, that triggers the state requirement for a resale?
Not necessarily, because what would happen is if you have a board, I think what happens is when you officially have a board that needs to file and register, I mean, you might have the minute
Yeah.
you're licensed, right? I mean, an HOA does have to be licensed, or, I mean, they have to have some sort of registration with the state. And it may be when they start collecting dues, because now they're dealing with public funds, right? So now we're accumulating dues, monies.
Right.
And if you're not accumulating dues, right, what, and that may very well be it, because what do dues do? Dues signify in the collection of that you are a member thereof. And without dues, who's to say who's a member other than, hey, you're a property owner? But then along with that come voting rights. And with the voting rights come, the ability to enter into contracts on behalf of multiple individuals. So, I mean, I guess, if I think about this in its logical conclusion, it doesn't necessarily have to be the collection of dues, but there needs to be some form of, and it is voluntary, which means it's
No.
not binding. Which means an individual can say, no, I'm tired of being a part of it.
They weren't voluntary. It wasn't a voluntary HOA. If the CC&Rs clearly stated, all the rules and all that stuff.
All right, that's the most important.
So, and the buyer had all that information. It was just the presence of an active HOA that was so
right.
weird, because even those officers didn't know what a resale certificate was when I started asking for
write that in. Clear Creek HOA is a HOA. All right. Subject property is under the Clearwater HOA, right? As revealed in the title report and on the preliminary title. HOA does not currently collect dues or provide a resale certificate. Buyer to verify. Buyers shall have by October 31st of 2020 to thoroughly examine the covenants and restrictions regarding Clear Creek HOA. And, and recording constitutes buyer satisfaction.
Okay, thanks.
Write it out. Just make sure that somebody can't say, well, I didn't know. No, you did. Right here in writing. Right. And that's where it's really important for us. And we talked about that in that one contract one I did 2 weeks ago, which was making sure that, you read through it and is it clear? Sometimes we got to say it out loud a couple times. And that really helps me when I verbalize it and I hear it out loud, it helps a lot than if I write it and I say it out loud. And sometimes I got to go back and forth and go, okay, what is my intention here? I might rewrite that sentence 2 or 3 times, but it's really clear. It's really important that the intent is stated. And for our point, it's really important that we just disclose to the buyer what's going on. There is an HOA. They're not collecting dues. Research and make sure that you're satisfied with the HOA requirements on or before this date. Otherwise, as part of your due diligence, but that's how I would handle it. And yeah, you run into weird stuff like that every once in a while. Sometimes you run into stuff where you have a shared well agreement, and they're not. That's a whole nother thing. That's another disclosure. But anyway, I do want to make sure that we move on to, let's see what we've got here. The other disclosure I wanted to go into real quick. We got residential property disclosure. What do you think? What other things are vitally important? What do you think is another one that's a vitally important disclosure?
Appraisal. Oh, I thought we were back on the timeline. Sorry. Disclosure.
Yeah, what's a really it's important disclosure? What's the one that can probably cost you your license? The one that's the most important?
EREC.
Well, up there. How about a conflict of interest?
Interest.
Right. So a conflict of interest. This is the one that, by the way, I will tell you, I have a contract, a property that I sold when I was back at Keller Williams and I represented the buyer. And a buyer bought the property from a licensee, and it ended up that the licensee was brother with a contractor who worked on the property, and then that contractor didn't perform. Like they were supposed to do some stuff, the money was escrowed, and they didn't do it, and there was a big nightmare. Because they didn't get it done by a certain amount of time, so what it was we closed in the winter. A French drain was supposed to be installed during the spring. The spring came, they never installed the French drain. They made excuse after excuse. They didn't do it. The water intrusion got worse. Mold then got into the property in the fall. And so the buyer went and sued the contractor and then found out the contractor was like, well, go talk to the realtor because he's my brother-in-law.
Oh, shit.
All right. Well, then what? Oh, yeah, they're family. And the reason he didn't do it is because he owed him money and they were squabbling between each other about another deal that went sideways. And they screwed this buyer over because they were bitching about money on something else. And it was just it was a sparring family. The broker at RE/MAX, poor Jackie, had no idea this went through. And the broker, because who would have known? Why? Because the name of the contractor and the name of the buyer were different names because, they're in-laws, but they're not directly related. They did actually fine the broker $5,000. They fined Jackie and the brokerage $5,000 for something the licensee did.
Wow.
Okay. So this is where we got to look out because what are those things that might apply? The licensee and the buyer are okay. Well, obviously, are you the buyer? Is the buyer the and licensee the same? Is the seller and the licensee the same? Is the licensee related to the buyer? Okay. Is a listing licensee related to the seller? Is anybody related to anybody going on here? Are anybody family in any way, shape, or form? Do you have a business or financial relationship other than personal services agreement? Here's another one. We have one where Todd O'Banion, property management, has a contractor working on properties he manages. He failed to disclose to those individuals, even as property manager, that he's related to the property management, that he's related to the guy doing the work on the property. Okay, now O'Banion's in trouble. Why? Because he's required, if he has a business financial relationship, other than purpose, you'll see that down here, related to a contractor performing work. As a property manager, you're still required to disclose these things, even as a property manager, not just a licensee. So then, do you have a business financial relationship other than personal services agreement? Where might a licensee and a buyer or a seller, because this applies to both, where might you have a relationship other than the listing agreement?
If you are a property manager,
Yeah, there you go. So what if the guy listing the property also is the property manager? Yeah, you got to disclose a conflict of interest. Really good. What else? Well, maybe they own a business together. Maybe they own a coffee shop. Maybe they do something, you know what I mean? Like it extends beyond, basically beyond the personal services agreement, which is basically the real estate contract here. Do they have any other business relationships? Okay. The licensee is related to a contractor performing work on the property that's subject to this transaction. So right here, this is where they got in trouble. The licensee is related to the contractor performing work. Yeah, they were related. The licensee is a contractor performing work that is subject on the property. This is one I've often got to sign that I just got to say, hey, listen, I did work on this. I have a contracting company. You know, I've had to do that a few times. I haven't done it in a long time because if it's my listing, as much as I can, I just send someone else to work on it. The licensee receives compensation from someone other than a party to the contract or another party having a financial interest in the transaction. Where might a licensee receive compensation from someone other than the party to the contract or another party having financial interest in this transaction? It's very rare, but there are situations where it might get done.
Well, you can't have bonuses or something outside the contract, right?
Well, you can as long as it's disclosed. If someone else is giving, let's say a relocation company is paying somebody, or you know, the relocation company is providing a bonus to a licensee, or there's a bonus from some other things. If there's any kind of bonus that's not being paid through contracts, this is where either you disclose it on another form, which is, hey, there's a compensation, which you do have to disclose all compensation related to a contract. And the purpose for this is just in case there's compensation being paid to a licensee that's in the form of something other than commission or a standard fee, like a transaction fee. Are you receiving? So if you're other than a party to the contract, okay? So do you guys remember when home warranties used to give bonuses to licensees for selling home warranties?
Yeah, that was before my time, but yeah, I've heard that.
So this,
Yeah.
if you were getting a kickback, that's why they quit doing it, because a bunch of people almost got their license fined for not disclosing that, and they technically were supposed to be filling this out. The licensee is receiving compensation from another party to the contract or another party having a financial interest in the transaction. Does a home warranty company who's getting the home warranty, do they have a financial interest?
Yes.
Yes. And if they're paying the licensee a finder's fee, is that considered a compensation from someone other than parties to the contract?
Absolutely.
Yes, that has to be disclosed. So that's why they quit doing it, because of violation of this right here, and several licensees almost got fined. But that's where it might be. If you were getting a finder's fee, if you sell a property and the contractor getting the roof, offers to give you $150 for giving them the bit, you better fill that out. The contractor says, hey, I'm getting $150 for referring him this deal, whatever it is. Now it says compensation. Does that mean money?
No.
No. What else? How else can compensation show up?
Gift cards or trips.
You know what? The roofer doing the work on the property, because I sent him this job, is going to come to my house and he's going to roof my shed for free. Right? Give me a kickback for sending him business. That would be considered something like that. You got to disclose it. Now, most people would never disclose those things. They just say, oh, he's my buddy and he's doing it. But do understand as a disclosure, the law sees that differently. Okay. A licensee receives compensation for community association management while simultaneously engaged as a property manager for a unit within the community association. So this one is real basic. So again, this is, you know, when Roy, if Roy goes to list a condo or Roy lists something and his property management company also manages it, this is what he's got to fill out. He's got to check that. Okay, because the licensee is receiving compensation for a community associate manager while simultaneously engaged as a property manager for a unit within the community association. So this might be, okay, this is what Roy would fill out if his property management company is managing a rental in the unit and his HOA company is also managing the building. He does need to disclose that. Okay. And seller or licer is offering a bonus to selling. So here's where your brokerage, the extra $1,000. So those are the other things that are really important to disclose and some of the things to take into consideration. You know,
Kevin,
yes, ma'am.
I want to say something here because the way I have learned this is that you can't just write the disclosure into your purchase and sale agreement, because the law says you have to begin any written statement of the conflict of interest with these words underlined and written in bold: disclosure of conflict of interest. So that is why I keep flagging these.
So again, you're saying that should be under what? That should be in the purchase and sell agreement as an additional document?
No, that they have to use the disclosure of conflict of interest form or something like it, where it's underlined and written in bold. You can't just put it under additional terms.
Oh, gotcha. I see what you're saying. Okay, so you just make sure you're drawing extra attention to it.
I don't know why, but it's in the section 8.88 of the statutes. It has to be done that way.
All right, well, that's very interesting. So you have to reference it and put it in bold.
Yep.
Subject to, and that's on page 8, that's on your purchase and sell agreement under that additional terms. Subject to the disclosure of conflict of interest and bolded.
Nope, it's under, it's in the statute. It said the conflict of interest form on Flex is acceptable. Just writing it into additional terms is not acceptable.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. All right, so they want the disclosure, but they want that form completed.
Exactly.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for that. Excellent. Well, that's just touching base on a couple of disclosures. We had a small group, the two of you. I love you. Okay. But you know what? These are critical. I mean, you know, when I came to REBA, this is the one thing I really wanted to teach. I wanted to make sure that if you're a REBA associate, our contract knowledge is profound. That, you know, that's basically how we give ourselves really good longevity in this, because, you know, if you reduce your role down to having professional pictures taken and sticking a house on the market, then Zillow will wipe you out every time. But if you have a profound understanding of real estate contracts and you can help people negotiate these things and hold things together and navigate all the requirements in the sea of confusion, that's how you give yourself longevity, because you have a skill, not a service. Everything else is a service. Contract negotiations is a skill. And so I appreciate you guys being here. Hey, we'll probably pick up next week. There's a bunch of other disclosures and stuff in there. If you have any other questions, concerns, and Sylvia, I love that you throw topics out there, but if there's something that you guys want us to cover more in depth, please reach out to me so we can put it on future calendars. Other than that, you're free to go.
Thank you.
Take care.